What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Dojo Setting. Today we're going to talk about forerunning. Before we do, make sure you like and subscribe. It helps me grow, helps me know what you guys like, what you don't like, stuff like that. Follow me on Instagram, and if you want to stay current and even ahead of the game, all our videos are posted on our Patreon page a week in advance. So check that out if you are so inclined. So, forerunning. Just a quick recap. Forerunning is after you set a climb, you're testing it to assess it for a lot of different things, but mainly to make sure that the climb works in a general sense. I guess today we're going to talk about some of my little tips and tricks and whatnot about forerunning. So, the very first thing, after you set a climb, you haven't tested it yet, anything like that, the main thing needs to be safety. You gotta make sure that, people aren't gonna get hurt on your climb. That could look like a bunch of different things. That could look like maybe a dyno that throws you into a sidewall if you fall. Maybe that's maybe that is a big hold lower down on the wall that if you fall, you might land on it. It could even go as far as to say, like, well, hey man, you're using a really shallow 2-finger pocket on V0. That's gonna hurt a lot of people. That's not grade appropriate. So safety needs to be the most, the first thing. If you're setting in a commercial capacity, sometimes the person who set the climb might not see something that's potentially dangerous. So that's why it's good to really make sure that that's the case. We had somebody set a dyno a couple months ago at our gym, and just sort of as I was describing before, if you miss the dyno, you're gonna hit the sidewall, and obviously that's not good. We don't want people to get hurt. So it's always good. Okay, so with forerunning, a couple things, little weird quirks of mine. I am more than happy to have this argument with you guys for sure. Let me know down in the comments if you disagree, but I think you should always be the first person to climb your climb. Reason being, if it ends up not being that great, if it ends up needing a lot of work, you're the one that catches it and that has to fix it. This is a lot more prevalent on sport climbs than it is boulders. If you have a sport climb that that just needs a lot of work, it's not just like, oh, there's this one spot here. It's like, well, this, that, and then there's a whole list of things that aren't working with the climb. You are the one that realizes it. You are the one that gets to fix it. If you have somebody else run up there, you're just, essentially, they need to clean up your mess. So I always like to be the first one to get on a climb. Boulders as well. Boulders are a little trickier though, because with the Rick scale, the complexity of things, sometimes you don't want to be the first person to get on your climb, because then that kind of gives away the beta. So there are situations that it definitely doesn't help to be the first person to climb your boulder, but in a general sense, be the first one to climb your boulder. So behind me we have this red boulder. I put this thing up on the wall. I have not climbed it yet. I don't know what's going on. We're gonna forerun it today, and I'm gonna sort of take you through the process of forerunning. So let's just get into this. The first thing, and a lot of this is going to be a little dependent on whether or not you're forerunning your own climb or forerunning somebody else's climb. Before I give any feedback of a climb, I usually want to try to find out what the goal of the climb was. that is different than the intended beta. So what I mean by goal is, let's say it's a V0 climb. What's the goal of a V0? In my opinion, it's to get everybody to the top of the wall so that they can find some success and want to come back to the gym. So it could be, hey, this is for a little, intramural competition that we run throughout the gym, a climbing league or whatever, and we need to make sure that this is going to separate some climbers. Whatever the goal may be, keep that goal in mind. I don't think the grade is necessarily super important. If your assignment was to set a V3 and it's V7, yeah, that's not really a good thing. But if your goal was V3 and it ends up being, I don't know, maybe V2, maybe V4, somewhere around the V3 realm, for me personally, that's not a huge deal. As long as it's a good climb, I'd rather it be a good climb rather than having to hit that target grade. I'm gonna hop on this red climb here and we will talk about it. So one thing I would always recommend is to pre-chalk your holds. Pre-chalking your holds essentially just helps everybody. So it helps you save a little bit of your skin. You're getting a more accurate representation of what the climb is. So always pre-chalk your holds. Okay, so overall, not bad. It works. I got to the top, but a couple things in there that I didn't like. These are really nitpicky things, but that's why we're forerunning. First, the start position felt really awkward to me. I didn't like it. It just kind of was really uncomfortable. It wasn't very intuitive. It just didn't work. So I'm gonna lower the right foot. That will sort of allow me not to be super bunched up at the start. It'll be a little bit more comfortable. So let's lower that foot and we'll see what that does for us. All right, so that definitely made it a lot more comfortable. However, it took away the necessity for that heel hook at the start. To me, that's okay. I think that a very important skill for route setters is to know when to let go of an idea. You can spend a long time forcing something to work or trying to force something to work. At the end of the day, how important is it that it works exactly like that? For me, the entrance move, having a heel hook here on an otherwise 10 move boulder, I just don't, it's just not worth it. Aside from that, everything else was pretty comfortable. So the next thing that I would be assessing for is fairness. So you want to make sure that whoever your target audience is, that it's going to be a fair fight for them. So what I mean by that is, I'm 6 foot tall with a 6'2" wingspan. It works for me, but does it work for people who are shorter than me? So yeah, with that, again, assess who the target audience actually is. If it's V10 and somebody who's 4 foot tall can't do it, that may or may not necessarily be a bad thing. Not to say that short people aren't strong, but generally speaking, it's not a huge deal if somebody really, really short, aka a small kid, can't do a move on a really, really hard boulder. Whole different story if you're setting something specifically for kids or an easier grade. For me, if there is a move on V0, V1, arguably V2 that I don't think somebody who's 4 foot tall could do, I usually have an issue with that. But on something like this, I don't really have, I don't feel strongly that they need to be able to do it. As long as you're not shutting them down on every climb, it's okay to have a couple climbs that are a little reachier. So, but yeah, let's go back and assess this thing for height. Right. So you see the second move here is actually a pretty big move if you're gonna keep your feet down low. Now you have the option of putting your left foot up on the left start hold, which makes the move a lot smaller. I don't really have a huge problem with this move. From the left hand, kicking your right foot out to the ball is kind of big, but the hold that you're on right here is, it's good, it's a jug. I'm not too worried about height with that. So let's move on. So overall, I don't really have any other issues with height on this thing. Everything is pretty doable for most heights. I suppose the next thing I would consider is, does it meet the grade criteria? I was aiming for like V4 on this thing. I think I hit it. Who knows? But again, for me, that's a very low thing on the list, as long as it's a good climb and as long as it's not too obnoxiously out of the realm. So when you're forerunning somebody else's climb, and this had to do a lot with last week's video, there's a right way and a wrong way to deliver feedback. So just gonna kind of recap that really quick. Make sure you're being constructive with your feedback. I don't like it because I don't know why is not helpful at all. And I like it is a nice thing to say, but also not helpful. So give them reasons why you don't like it or why you do like it, so they know what to keep offering in the future. With the intended beta, usually when you climb something, more times than not, if you climb it and it doesn't feel right, you probably aren't doing it in the way that the setter wanted it to be done, more times than not. So usually the first thing that I do when I get off the wall is like, well, what did you want to happen here? And that way we can talk about it and we can try to get it to work. Again, you don't necessarily need to get married to this boulder. If you need to let a sequence go, you can let it go. I've had times where I've set a boulder and I'm just like, it's just not coming together, and I just strip the whole thing and restart. Sometimes you get so tunnel vision into trying to make one thing work that it ends up sacrificing a lot of time, a lot of resources, and a lot of brain power to get it to work. Sometimes that's worth it, other times it's not. Sometimes it's like, yeah, this was a cool idea, but it's not working. We need to move on. We need to get something else that does work on the wall. Usually in forerunning, I will look at the comfortability of the hold too. For example, one of the things that bothers me most is on dead vertical walls using really sharp crimpers. You can get bad crimpers without making them sharp. There are holds that cater better to being on an overhang. So If you have holds with a smaller radius that end up putting a little bit more pressure, and it could be, it could be jugs, it could be crimpers, it could be anything. Make sure you're putting them on an angle that is not uncomfortable to climb on. I think for me there's some codes to forerunning. So usually when a setter says it's there or it works, that's not a good thing. Just because it's there and it works doesn't mean that it should be there, if that makes sense. In my opinion, you should be setting stuff that you would want to climb on. If the only time you're going to climb on it is forerunning, and you don't think that it's worth climbing on after that, why is it on the wall? If you don't want to climb on it and you set it, or you're part of the setting crew, why should anybody else want to climb on it? Another thing with forerunning is you want to make sure that the intended beta is the easiest beta to do. There's always going to be skips on stuff. As long as the way that you want it to be done is the easiest way, that is what we're looking for. I'm going to try to cheat this boulder and then we'll talk about that. So that there's really the only cheat that is kind of plausible on this boulder. It does work. However, it's very height dependent. To fix it, I'm going to move this down. Okay, so moving it down did help. So with every change, you need to climb the boulder again and make sure that everything still works. So in this case, it does still work. I mentioned in the last video the difference between changing something because you don't like it and changing something because there's something wrong with it. Just because you don't like something doesn't mean that it has to change. That's why there are multiple setters at gyms. If I wanted to change everything to where it fits my style, then why do we have other setters here? Why isn't it just me setting? Now, I would argue that making something more comfortable does not necessarily mean that you're making it cater you. Make one change at a time and then see how it affects the rest of the boulder. There's all different ideas on what could happen. Making all those changes could really mess up the boulder. So make one change and assess from there. Don't make a whole bunch of changes. The key thing with forerunning is finding out the root of the problem and fixing that. Sometimes I'll hear, well, that's too hard because this is too shouldery or this, that, and that. And they start changing things and it doesn't fix the problem. It's because they're not addressing the root of the issue. So try to identify the real reason something's not working and change that. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this helped, and we will see you next time.